Welcome to Malpractice Podcast.
So, are you ready to get started?
Shit, we have to start over. My stomach just growled.
I didn't hear it. It doesn't count.
Okay, fine. Then yes, I'm ready to get started.
I'm Jess.
I'm Sydney.
And we're hungry.
And we're hungry, and this is Malpractice Podcast.
Malpractice in the afternoon.
In the early afternoon, though.
I know, that's pretty good for us.
And that's pretty good for us, because
we're either 7:30 a.m. or 7 p.m. usually.
And there's no in between almost ever.
Almost ever.
And sometimes those evening recordings get out of hand.
I can't process information after 7 p.m. So I'll be like, I don't know what I said.
You're like,
I don't know.
I can't, and that's all you need to know.
Yeah, who knows? Not me.
Simply can't, simply won't. How was your Thanksgiving?
Yeah, it was good. I do, want to say that we celebrate the eating at Thanksgiving, not the origination of Thanksgiving.
I mean, does anybody not just celebrate the eating part?
I think people just don't want to put two and two together, but I do.
Fair.
I want four really bad.
Yeah.
I want to put it together.
Jess wants to talk about it, and that really should have been...
I want to talk
the name of this podcast should have been, Let's Dig Some Shit Up.
Let's talk about it. Okay, but do we need to do another podcast where we just talk about stuff?
I think that's all we do on this podcast, right?
Michelle says we need to do another one.
Where we just talk... Oh, like a separate podcast where we don't talk about anything professional.
Correct.
Okay.
Where, we basically do very little, if any, research, and we just talk about our opinions on stuff.
Well, I feel like that's going to be this episode for me, so tell me what you think, Michelle.
Oh, same. I think we should do it. We should talk about it offline.
Our podcast, this podcast specifically, should be called We're Mad, Let's Talk About It.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it should be under the brand Big Moose Energy.
Big Moose Energy is our network name.
Yeah, 100%.
But it was good. You ate a lot?
I did. Yeah, I did eat a lot. It was a good time.
Mm-hmm.
What about you?
We did a dinner meal this year, which was different, but the children hosted it for the first time, me included.
Mm-hmm.
Thor and Sochi hosted my brother and sister-in-law.
Yeah.
And it was lovely. Everything went really well. I was so exhausted that I don't think I've ever slept better than I did on Thanksgiving night.
Oh, wow.
Passed out.
That's good.
Did not move until morning.
That's so good.
It was great, yeah.
And shout out to Thor, because he is an avid listener.
Yeah, he's the best. Best brother-in-law ever.
Damn, Sean Paul, you ain't got shit.
Oh, shit. Oh, shit. What? What I meant to say is best of the pair. Nope. Thor and Sean Paul together.
Simply the best. Better than all the rest.
I don't think he listens. I'll just, whatever, fucking cut all this out.
Oh, I think you should leave it. It's so funny.
If Thanksgiving is not a time for offending your relatives, then what is it?
Then what is? I'd stay offended, so I know people are enjoying that. If that was really the time, I will be offended.
Same, correct. Also, we were playing a game on Thanksgiving. This is a perfect transition for this fucking episode because we were playing a game on Thanksgiving and, Family Feud. We were playing Family Feud.
Oh, okay.
And the question was organizations that have been involved in corruption.
All of them.
And I was like, the Catholic Church.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And my mother-in-law was like shooting daggers at me with her eyes. And I was like, but am I wrong, though?
Can you say no?
Can anyone say no?
I didn't think so. Moving on.
If you feel like you can say no, wait until the end of this episode and then tell me you can say no.
Or just Google the Crusades.
Do you want to get into this episode?
Look, before we get into this, we just want to say.
Go ahead.
Mostly I wanted to say, kind of how this fits into malpractice.
Yeah.
Because in this situation that we're going to tell you about, there was a lot of lying and deceiving and the impression of rehabilitation for women who were in need.
Often medical need.
Yeah. It was all just a lie, a farce. And it was just about making money from their labor.
Right.
So kick us off, Sydney. How did we get here?
I'm going to kick us off with a story about some unmarked graves, which I feel like is never...
It's never good.
How you want a story to start. Right.
Yeah. Well, we do, but most people don't.
We do. Most people don't.
We like it.
I mean, we're fascinated by it. We like it is a harsh... It sounds harsh.
It's wild.
The story is
a
crazy.
Wild story.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, we're going back, zoop, zoop, to 1993.
We were 2 years old.
Oh, we were 2 years old.
I don't know. I relate everything to me because I am selfish. So.
No, same.
I just always do that.
Anytime I see, like, my birthday in a story that we're doing, I'm like, I was born then.
I was alive.
Okay, so 1993, we're 2 years old. Now we have to get serious. They uncover the unmarked graves of 155 women in these convent grounds in one of these so-called laundries, which eventually led to media revelations about the operations of some very shady, secretive institutions called the Magdalene Laundries. From History.com, this is all paraphrased, it's not an exact quote.
But the vibe is from them.
The vibe is from History.com. When the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity decided to sell some land they owned in Dublin, Ireland to pay some debts in 1992, the nuns followed the proper procedures. They petitioned officials for permission to move the bodies of the women buried in their cemetery at the Donnybrook Laundry, which between 1837 and 1992 served as a workhouse and institution for, quote, fallen women. We're going to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
They were selling the land to a real estate developer, and when they went to move the bodies, it turned out that there were 22 more corpses than the sisters had applied for permission to exhume.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, they only had death certificates for 75 of those bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Out of the 155 that end up being exhumed eventually, despite the fact that it is a criminal offense in Ireland, as in most places, to fail to register a death that occurs on one's premises. So,
right.
Shady.
Yeah.
Eventually, it was revealed that Donnybrook was no ordinary resting place. It was actually a mass grave.
Mm-hmm.
Inside were the bodies of scores of women, the undocumented, uncared about inmates of one of Ireland's notorious Magdalene Laundries. Their lives, and later their deaths, have since been shrouded in secrecy.
According to the women, the original mission of saving souls had somehow evolved into a money-making operation built on the backs of unpaid, unwilling laborers who were strictly controlled, as seen in this excerpt from a list of rules published in 1898. They should be obliged to go to the dormitory in silence. We should not allow 2 children to be alone.
I wouldn't be allowed to speak to anybody. I wasn't allowed to tell anybody who I was, tell anybody where I came from. The nuns were very cruel.
For more than 2 centuries, women in Ireland were sent to institutions like Donnybrook as a punishment for things like having sex outside of marriage, unwanted mothers, flirtatious women, basically anyone deemed like quote-unquote unfit for society, were forced to labor under the strict supervision of nuns for months or even years, sometimes even for the duration of their lives.
Yeah.
When this mass grave was discovered at Donnybrook, these 155 unmarked tombs touched off a scandal that exposed the full extent and horrors of the Magdalene Laundries.
There was shock at the story of unrecorded burials and corpses with broken limbs. People began to ask what had been going on in the laundries.
Yeah. So Sydney and I are going to get real enraged, I think, this entire episode. Mm-hmm. Please join us in that camp.
Yeah.
So these Magdalene Laundries, also known as the Magdalene Asylums, operated from the 18th century to the late 20th century, the last one closing in the late 1990s. Ahem. That's a long fucking time, and the 90s is like 2 seconds ago, because that's when we were born.
It was 1996.
Yeah, we don't love that.
That's like yesterday.
Yeah, it's really sick, and just wait. Just wait, you'll see why it's sick. Well, we kind of already touched on it. If you don't already think it's sick,
it's going to get worse.
Yeah. The Laundries got their name from Mary Magdalene, the fallen quote-unquote woman who became one of Jesus's closest followers. Like the story of her is that she was
a sex worker.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
she asked for forgiveness and repented, blah, blah, blah.
Correct.
So they began 150 years ago as homes to rehabilitate prostitutes. That's what they were saying anyway. They were run by Roman Catholic orders. They were places where fallen women were confined in the idea of helping, supporting, providing rehab of sorts, etc. It's estimated that at least 30,000 women were confined there.
Yeah.
Fallen women is an archaic term which was used to describe a woman who has lost her innocence and fallen from the grace of God. As Sydney said before, it could be referring to someone who people thought were promiscuous.
Yeah. I mean,
it could be anybody.
At that time period, it's like you're a sex worker, your family member is abusing you. In some cases, people were taken from their homes when there was family abuse.
Yeah.
You were sexually assaulted. You were, like, you showed your ankle in public one time. It's like,
yeah, you lost your innocence in some way,
right?
According to societal standards at the time,
exactly.
Even if that was through sexual assault.
Yes.
On your person.
Correct.
Because they didn't want to shame the family.
Yes, that's basically what it was about. Like, hide this person away because we don't want to
deal with that.
Because we don't want to deal with it.
At this time in Ireland, missionaries were required to approach prostitutes and give them religious information to divert them from their vicious lives, right?
Yeah.
But other women were put in these institutions, like the unmarried mothers, the daughters of unmarried mothers, and those who were a burden to their families or considered promiscuous, which in the early 1920s could have been, as we said, anything, and was.
Quite literally anything.
Anything.
In the 1920s?
Wearing pants? No.
Your haircut's too short? No.
Smoking cigarettes? No.
No.
Even though you shouldn't smoke cigarettes, they're not good for you.
You shouldn't smoke cigarettes, but it's not a reason.
It's not a reason!
Also, I saw this thing the other day that was like, if you weren't someone that the church would have burned at the stake 1,000 years ago, what are you even doing with your life? You're no fun.
Yeah, you weren't a fun time. Yeah.
So if no one in your life could ever have called you
a fallen woman
for some reason, then you need to let your hair down.
Yep. So girls and women were imprisoned in these laundries and forced to carry out unpaid labor, as well as being subjected to serious psychological and physical maltreatment. The choice of work was no accident. They were called Magdalenes or penitents.
Yeah.
Because they were like scrubbing things, cleaning things in an effort to wash away their sins along with the stains on the laundry of anyone who sent the laundry in. And like, we'll get into like who was sending laundry into these institutions. It's also kind of fucked. But basically they were using this idea that like you're scrubbing away your past life as well as these stains.
Yeah.
You're like paying penance for like the things that you've done or didn't do or that were nobody's business.
Or that were done to you.
To you, right.
It's like a scared straight program.
100% disgusting.
That was the idea, I think.
I think so too. And I think it was, I mean, it is super secretive, which is like also a problem if there's no transparency and like some...
Anywhere there's no transparency for how things are going, where the money is coming from and going to, like, it's just rife for abuse, right?
It's just a no.
Yeah.
Yeah. The income from their labor, because they were working, right?
And they were earning money.
Money, yeah. But they were never given any money.
Right.
They said they used it to put a roof over their heads, food on their plates, and financed any other ventures that the nuns might be involved in. Besides washing all day, every Magdalene needed to pray out loud for their sins. So they'd also have like 6 a.m. mass in some cases where they would be like forced to like pray and ask for forgiveness.
This sounds terrible.
Yeah, sounds like my worst freaking nightmare.
I have questions. Wait. Okay. Let me readjust. Okay. So I can get really like into this.
Yeah.
I have questions because in the beginning of the story, the nuns from the Donnybrook Laundry were, I read, in at least 2 places, selling the land because they had had some bad business dealings that went poorly in the stock market. So I'm just wondering, like, how many ventures can nuns be involved in?
And
I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like they're not complicit.
Oh, no, they're complicit. And in many cases, it seems like the nuns were the ones carrying out
100%.
the, like, pretty cruel punishments that these women go through.
Yes.
So At the time, in Ireland, the church and the government was very intertwined also. So there was kind of this partnership to rid communities of women with quote-unquote low morals who were quote-unquote like ruining society, basically was the thought.
Recently, some of the surviving women started setting aside their shame to speak out.
We should acknowledge the fact that we dehumanize these women. In the context of the women that went in there, obviously, the women that went in there were known as fallen women, whereas the women that I've come across weren't fallen women in any shape or form, and actually the state were the ones that put the women in there in the first instance.
I think they have to be honest and say that the state were involved. And I want the Minister for Justice to say that they were involved.
While the government never specifically did anything to put these women in the institutions, they also never protected them from being exploited. They never protected them from being held against their will or stopped the spaces that they were in from stripping them of their rights. Because that's what happened. So although the institutions were run by Catholic orders, they were supported by the Irish government, which funneled money toward the system in exchange for laundry services. So the government is also getting basically free laundry services for like the military, for the House of Parliament, for all of these.
Everything.
Basically everything that's run by the government, they're pushing their laundry, which is substantial, through these Magdalene Laundries. They were part also of an interlocking system of orphanages, that's plural, orphanages. Why am I like this?
Orphanage is a hard word.
Boy, especially when it's plural. Industrial schools, mother and baby homes for unwed mothers, church-run institutions in which Ireland once confined tens of thousands of its own citizens. However, whatever the government wanted, whatever the institutions did, none of this decreased the amount of sex work on the streets.
Right. It's not like they were actually doing anything.
Right.
They were just being dicks.
It's such a stupid thing to just be like, well, if we take all of these sex workers and put them in a laundry where they're not getting paid instead, it'll fix the problem. It's like you're ignoring whatever is causing people to turn to sex work.
Maybe go to the people paying for the sex work.
I mean, somebody's doing it, right? Somebody's paying for it. And also, to me, it's like, they're doing this sort of punishment thing, which America knows about this a lot. They're doing this punishment thing instead of a social safety net, where it's like, instead of looking at why people are doing sex work instead of other jobs, they're just like
solving the actual problem.
You're not solving the problem. You're reacting to something that gives you an icky feeling.
Yeah.
Right. So they were operated by religious orders like the Sisters of Mercy, the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity, the Sisters of Charity, and the Good Shepherd Sisters, which, if you belong to an order called the Sisters of Charity and you're like beating people on the side, go fuck yourself.
Or Mercy, the Sisters of Mercy.
Right, how dare you.
The Sisters of Lack of Mercy.
The Sisters of Being Giant Dicks.
The Sisters of Don't Know the Definition of Mercy. I mean, seriously, What the hell?
I don't know where...
It's just fucked up.
It's so fucked up. Okay, the last one closed on October 25th, 1996, which again, very recent. The buildings from the outside also were extremely unassuming. They looked like a convent or a school, so you would never kind of know what's going on inside them unless you knew someone who had been there.
Yeah, you wouldn't investigate.
But behind the front buildings, you could find wash houses, workstations, and the nuns apparently ruled these with impunity, sometimes beating inmates and enforcing strict rules of silence. One survivor, Mary Smith, who had her name changed, like legally they changed her name in this asylum.
Oh, yeah.
She said, you didn't know when the next beating was going to come.
One of my jobs was to help to lay out the women when they died. I was happy to do it because at least these women were getting out of the laundry and their suffering were over.
They also apparently would deprive them of meals, make them pray for crazy hours. Like,
yeah,
it was all punishment based.
They're just dicks. And you could be wondering how women became confined, because that's my thing. I was like, who the fuck is putting these women here?
And how?
Okay. There were a ton of channels for that.
Yeah.
Of course. They could be sent there through the judicial system, including those committed informally or as a condition of probation, those held on remand. They could be sent to the laundries after release from prison sentences, and those sent to the laundries instead of like reformatory schools.
Right.
It's kind of, it felt to me kind of like a privatized prison option for these women.
Yeah. It feels to me like women whose parents didn't have the money to keep them out of here are the ones that went there.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes your families would commit you to these places.
Sometimes their families would commit them, because I don't think, I mean, maybe I'm just trying to think the best of people, but
right.
I fully don't think that people knew how bad it was until like very recently.
Yeah. You could be transferred from like an industrial school or from a mother and baby home. And then the people were committed by their families, or church groups could commit you.
Ugh.
One source we looked at said that social workers, members of clergy, police, hospitals, local authorities, councils, and psychiatric hospitals also sent women there. In addition, that we've already mentioned, but there was evidence that girls who were abused were also sent there as like, get them out of here.
Yeah.
Don't want it, kind of remove them from, I guess, their loved ones. It's so weird.
Like you're the problem. I saw one where this girl was abused by her father starting from the time that she was 2 years old.
Oh, sick.
And her father was the one that committed her.
Right.
When she got like old enough to talk about it.
That's so sick.
There's obviously an issue with who can commit you. And the other thing is, all of these places that are allowed to commit workers or commit people to these work camps are also the ones benefiting from their work, right? Like hospitals are having their laundry done by these organizations.
Yep.
Just something to think about.
Yep. Gross. So once the women were in these convents, in heavy quotations, in these prisons, they were locked in the rooms with barred or unreachable windows, super high walls.
Yeah.
They were given no information on their release because it's basically a prison.
Right.
They would enter the facility and then they'd be like, oh, my name is Joe Schmo. And the nuns would be like, nope, we're going to change your name. And they were given an ID number.
Right.
And they were not allowed to go by their actual name. Some women who survived spoke about being told not to mention their families or where they were from or any of their past life.
Yeah.
They had their hair cut, their clothes were taken and replaced with uniforms because it's a prison. They couldn't write to anyone in the outside world or communicate. Visitation from family members and friends was not encouraged, and if it did happen, the nuns monitored them the entire time.
It sounds like a cult.
It does sound like a cult.
Like a prison cult, right?
But a cult that you don't even get to join. Like someone else puts you in.
Yeah. In the beginning, it's good. Yeah.
People like want to be in the cults.
Nobody wants to be here.
People want to be there. This cult, people are like, no, I'm not. I'm good.
Women were forced in these laundries to work from morning until night, washing, ironing, packing laundry, sewing, embroidering. I saw that they made lace or doing like other manual labor. They were run on a for-profit basis, so don't get it twisted. This is not they're helping out the local hospitals. This is a for-profit base.
No.
Where the institution is making money. They're just not paying the women for their labor.
Right.
The laundry they washed came from members of the public, local businesses, religious institutions, government departments, defense forces, public hospitals, public schools, prisons, and other state entities like the parliament. We already talked about this. The government is basically funneling these women into these programs and then giving them laundry to wash. If the women ever refused to work, they were deprived meals, they were put in solitary confinement, physically abused. I saw sometimes sexual abuse was like a form of punishment they used. Forced to kneel for long periods.
Yeah.
Humiliation rituals like shaving their hair.
Suddenly, people were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about what went on in those laundries for all those years.
It was a very cruel, poor country.
Patsy McGarry is the religious affairs correspondent for the Irish Times in Dublin.
And these places were found to be profitable. It wasn't as if the money wasn't there to feed and care for these children properly, but it wasn't done. Similarly, it was found with the Magdalene Laundries, or is now well known, that these women were just effectively imprisoned for life for uncertain offences.
If this is what we know about them doing, Like, I'm sure they were doing a lot worse.
Of course they were.
Because that's disgusting.
I mean, women died there. That's all you need to know.
Yes.
Women died there
Yes.
and were put in unmarked graves. That's all you needed to tell me for me to be like, this situation is not okay. Survivors of these institutions also said they were always being watched, verbally insulted, they were cold, they had terrible diets, poor or non-existent hygiene, they were given no education. Generally, a terrible experience in a forced institution that someone else put them in.
For no crimes.
It's like slavery. I mean, right?
It is 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Women who attempted to escape were returned quickly. If they tried to escape and were brought back, they were moved to another location. If they were released, it was often unannounced with no money and basically just set out into the cold with the clothing on their backs.
So we came across an interview with BBC News from February 5th, 2013 with two survivors that spoke about their experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Marina Gambold and Maureen Sullivan. And we wanted to share some of their stories, and a lot of this will be like directly from them.
Yeah.
So Marina was taken when she was 16 by a priest to one of these laundries.
Never go to a secondary location.
Nope. She said she was forced to eat off the floor. Marina was orphaned when she was 8 after both of her parents passed away. She lived with her grandmother for a couple of years, but when she turned 16, she realized she was on her own. Basically, she was like put out of the house.
Right.
A priest took her to the Magdalene Laundry, and she said, quote, "I walked up the steps that day and the nun came out and said, 'Your name has changed. You are Fidelma,'"
which is a terrible name.
A weird name.
Yeah.
Yeah. She then said, "I went in and I was told I had to keep my silence. I was working in the laundry from 8 in the morning until about 6 in the evening. I was starving with hunger. I was given bread and dripping for my breakfast every morning," which is essentially like a dip of grease. Like, it's not a meal.
It's not good.
She said, "We had to scrub corridors. I used to cry with sore knees. Housemaid's knees is what they called them. I used to work all day in the laundry doing white coats and the pleating." One day, she remembers she broke a cup, and a nun said to her, "I will teach you to be careful." She got a thick string and tied it around Marina's neck for 3 days and 3 nights, and they forced her to eat off the floor. She said, "Then I had to get down on my knees and I had to say, 'I beg Almighty God's pardon, Our Lady's pardon, my companion's pardon for the bad example I have shown.'" She said one night a nun locked her out in the cold overnight. She said, "She locked me out there for 2 nights, me and 2 other girls, and I nearly died of cold." Marina left after about 3 years when she was 19. So she didn't leave. She was released.
Yeah.
She said, "I was about 19 years of age then, and I had a nervous breakdown. I lived in England for almost 30 years before I moved back with my husband. Most of the time I have cried bitter tears, especially when I had nobody, and the pain never goes away." It's disgusting.
Yeah.
I have 0 words. It's an internment camp. It's disgusting.
That's exactly what it feels like. Maureen, the second story, was sent to a Magdalene Laundry in New Ross at the age of 12. Her mother remarried and she was being abused by her stepfather. A group of nuns noticed, called a priest. The nuns and priest convinced Maureen's mother that she would be going to like a lovely school.
Liars.
They were like, it's a better place for her. We're big liars. Maureen said that she never saw school books again. She was given a new name, Frances, and forced to work 7 days a week from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m.
But that lovely school turned out to be a Magdalene Laundry to do work every day.
Instead of an education, every day Sullivan says she was taken down a dark, dank passageway to a building next door and put to work.
It was just, it was sticky, sweaty. It was just horrible.
4 orders of Catholic nuns ran the 10 laundries around Ireland. The women say the labour was relentless, injuries common.
Very heavy work. If you weren't doing the sheets quick enough, they'd come over and hit you a box into the side of the face. I often collapsed. Many a time I collapsed.
Which is insane. And if you think about a 12-year-old working 15-hour days, it's like so sad.
The nuns were very cruel. They were very cruel. They'd come up behind you. If you didn't do the job right, they would just pull you by the hair. One nun pulled me right down to my toes.
And what was the offense?
Nothing. Just didn't do something that they asked me to do, or maybe I spoke.
This is a quote from Maureen. Quote, "What an evil thing to do. I never did any wrong. I was an innocent child, and a nun told me I could trust her to tell her my story. I trusted her, and what a fool I was. I mean, when you look back now, you were brought up to think you could trust a nun or a priest, but they did a lot of wrong by me and very many other people."
Period.
She was forced to scrub and polish floors, work in the laundry, and make rosary beads or knit sweaters. She spent time in the institution in New Ross and then in another Athy County, Kildare, and then another in Dublin. So she was in 3 separate institutions. She had almost no contact with her mother, only 4 visits over the course of 5 years. Quote, "I was coming up on 16 and my mother came up and said, 'Maureen, do you not think it's time you should be getting paid now?' So..."
She'd probably never even thought of it, right?
She never even thought of it.
Her mom was like, wait, you're working. If I was her mom, I'd be like, what the fuck?
Right.
Anyway, sorry. I don't mean to yell at your mom, Maureen.
No, I want to yell at Maureen's mom just a little bit.
A lot of
Maureen's
bit.
mom, she was being abused by her stepdad, and Maureen's mom was like, well, send her away. She's the problem.
Yeah, we'll go to a lovely school.
That's none of my business.
And then you go and see it, and obviously it's not a school.
Obviously it's not a school. Obviously she's working her fingers, her little 15-year-old fingers to the bone.
And you know she's working because you say, shouldn't you be getting paid?
Like, how is that your concern?
That's a
problem. That's a problem, Maureen's mother.
Yep.
So basically she goes to the Reverend Mother, the chief nun in charge, whoever, and the next morning they had packed her suitcase for her. They dropped her off at a train station with 5 pounds in her hand. They sent her back to the town that she was abused in, and she says no one cared about her or what happened to her. Other survivors have also shared their stories. Mary Norris and Josephine McCarthy each spent 3 years of hard labor, silence, and prayer after they were determined to be a moral danger to Irish society, which is fun. Both had spent time in Catholic orphanages and were sent out to work as servant girls where they ran into trouble with their employers. They were turned over to the nuns.
Basically, they were suspected of being extra flirtatious, and people thought, sorry, you can explain that. I'm just mad.
No, you go.
Their employers were basically like, these girls are promiscuous, and we have no evidence, but that's what we believe.
Right.
And I think it was because they were late one day. The employers were like, they're a little bit late, so they had to be doing some bullshit. When in fact, the employers were doing some bullshit.
The employers
by being
are
assholes.
always probably doing bullshit.
Don't even say probably. Snip the probably.
Snip that probably.
Snip it off.
So then they were turned over to the nuns. None of this was ever proven. It didn't even matter. No one cared, basically.
Yeah.
Josephine said she was accused of having sex in the back of a car, quote, "And the next thing I knew, I was with this woman on a train to Cork. I was just brought up here. I was told my name was Phyllis and I'd have to work in the laundry."
Imagine having a name, Josephine. How cute. And then they're like, your name is Phyllis.
Don't call me Phyllis.
That is an old lady name.
It's an old lady name and not a cute one that should come back into trendy stuff like Edna.
No.
I could take an Edna.
I think Edna is also a Phyllis
name. Oh, you do? I kind of do too. Mm-hmm. No, honestly, Edna is a grandma name. Like, imagine a baby named Edna.
Yeah. Mm-mm.
Phyllis and Edna, same camp. I'm trying to think of a good old school name.
Like Poppy. I think that's a cute name.
Poppy is adorable.
Penelope.
That is an old school. Penelope. Josephine. I love Josephine.
I love Josephine. I literally read it, was like, maybe I like the name Josephine.
Honestly, cute. They were given new names to break them from their past, quote unquote. Under this institution, they were held with the church's authority. Mary said, quote, "I would rather have been down in the women's jail. At least I would have gotten a sentence and I would know when I was leaving." Because there's no due process. There's no appeal. They're basically just throwing them in jail for whatever they decide is wrong that day and then never telling them when they're getting out.
Mary said no one in her family knew where she was. In some cases, the church would tell family members that they had found their missing relatives, but that they were in other sittings with new names, making it difficult to locate them.
Right.
I think people just trusted the institution, the religious institution.
You're right.
And that is where blind loyalty is a no-go for me.
No, it's a fuckaroo.
No. Mary was released when her aunt in Boston began asking questions.
Sorry. 1 second?
Yeah, and then Josephine was rescued by her brother. And she said, when I left, they gave my brother an envelope with 3 10-shilling notes in it. And my brother asked the nun what it was for. And she said, that's the payment for working. And my brother wasn't very nice. And he just tore it up and threw it back at her. At that time, that amount would be like $3.20.
We would have fought for sure.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Both Josephine and Mary say the institution was hardest on unmarried mothers.
Sure.
So their children would then be taken from them at birth and placed in orphanages. Most of those babies were kept at the same institutions in the orphanage spaces and adopted out to families and not given back to their actual biological mothers.
Right. I can't imagine, for me, I guess the hard part is, as a family member, I can't imagine being like, it's more important to me that no one finds out that you're an unwed mother than knowing that your loved one is like being tortured.
I really struggled with that too.
If you feel that way, you need to work on your like moral compass, I think.
I really did struggle with that, Sydney. I'm glad you brought that up because I don't do a good job of this, but I try and think about the situation in a cultural and historical context.
Yeah.
But this was not that long ago.
No.
They're stealing people. This is human trafficking.
It is human trafficking.
This is literally human trafficking.
I'm really glad that you said that because that's exactly what it is.
I will die on that hill.
Same.
There's plenty of hills I'll die on. Just add this hill to the list.
I'll get right on top of that hill and die because I don't care.
R.I.P.
This is absolutely human trafficking, and the institutions that were running this were entirely complicit. Everybody involved was complicit.
Everybody involved.
Oh, I should also say shout out to Jess because she put almost this entire episode together, mostly out of anger, I think.
I was a psycho. Out of pure, fueled by anger and a Diet Coke.
The slogan of this podcast should be fueled by caffeine and anger.
I'm still mad. And I want people held accountable. I want people in jail.
Yeah. Next, we're going to talk about kind of what happened after these places were closed. Because when they were closed down, many of the women had nowhere to turn. Some were still residing in the convents, being cared for by the same nuns who had imprisoned them.
What is that called? Stockholm Syndrome?
Stockholm Syndrome. They definitely had Stockholm's. If you were raised by the time you're from when you were 12 years old, when you're raised in that environment from the time that you're a kid, you have no idea what else is out there. You get Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah.
This is the association that represents the Nuns of Ireland, put out a statement saying that the sisters accept the part they played, but they want everyone to examine the time period in context. So...
Boo. Boo. Tomato, tomato, tomato. Boo.
Tomatoes for all my friends.
The problem is people just outward, no holds barred, trusted religious institutions, and I still think that's the problem today.
Right.
And didn't question anything, but people should have known.
Yes.
And I think they did know, and they turned a blind eye because it was a religious institution operating and running the situation.
As more such stories come to light, the more the Irish public demand to know how this catalogue of arbitrary detention and slave labour was allowed to go on until the last of the laundries closed in the 1990s. After all, the government was paying for women and children to be cared for in these institutions. It was when the United Nations Committee on Torture called for an investigation that the government here agreed to an inquiry.
Since 2001, the Irish government has finally acknowledged that the women in the Magdalene Laundries were victims of abuse.
Duh.
However, the Irish government originally resisted calls for investigations and proposals for compensation. They wanted none of it. They maintained originally that the laundries were privately run and abuses at the laundries were outside of the government's control, which is not true.
You are lying.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Evidence exists, however, to support the claim that they did know. Irish courts routinely sent women convicted of petty crimes to the laundry, and the government awarded lucrative contracts to the laundries without any insistence on protection, fair treatment of their workers. Basically, no one was checking on it. A formal state apology was officially issued in 2013, and a $50 million compensation scheme for survivors was set up by the Irish government. In 2018, I saw that Ireland's president, Michael D. Higgins, hosted a reception and a gala dinner for the 220 survivors who were able to attend. Many were still afraid.
Yeah.
Or did not feel that it would be mentally healthy for them to attend, as you can imagine.
To host a reception and a gala.
Yeah.
For survivors of human trafficking.
I think it's a little tone deaf.
I think they probably don't want to party.
I think they probably want money.
I think they probably deserve fucking money.
I think they got some money, but I don't think whatever they got, I guarantee it wasn't enough.
Not enough.
Also, what about the women who died?
Straight to jail, everyone. Everyone needs to go straight to jail. Any kind of like therapeutic moment for these survivors is important and a part of their healing. But
agreed.
I will never get over the president being like, I'm going to host a reception and a dinner for them. And somebody being like, that's a great idea. Instead of being like, actually, let's package up like access to therapists and counseling and set up group counseling. And like, you can speak and listen at these sessions and learn about the fucking horrible things that happened. And maybe have like some Ireland historians write about this and do oral history so that we never have anything like this ever happen again, and give these survivors their time.
Right. Yes. Nobody had the support network. Well, a lot of these women, I don't think had the support network that they needed. So the lesson from all of this should be, if you don't have that, be it for somebody else. Find a support network, be somebody else's support network. Make sure that no one you know is ever in a position to be abused like this.
And nothing that anyone does makes them like promiscuous enough for you to incarcerate them and human traffic them.
Right.
And that includes sex workers. So we just all need to shut the fuck up about other people's business and stop trying to force people to fit into what makes us comfortable.
Correct.
Please look into these if you are like, this isn't real. Go ahead. There have been plenty of episodes where Michelle's like, that's not real. And I'm like, it is real. And this is one of those, I think, for people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we know about that.
That's what we know about that. That's how we feel.
City has a lot of editing to do.
I have a lot of feelings about this entire episode.
Yeah, I do too. If you've come across something you think we should cover, send us a DM at Malpractice Podcast on Instagram or our email, malpracticepodcast@gmail.com.
You can leave us a review wherever you like to listen, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube. Also, don't forget, Malpractice makes perfect.
Perfect. Bye.
Bye.